Being an election year in Mississippi, it's always interesting to get the perspective of those who cover it on a day in and day out basis. And we're very fortunate to have a great panel this morning, folks that I've had the opportunity to, in many occasions, work with, sometimes even along side by side, as well as folks who really have an understanding of what's happening in Mississippi. So our panel this morning is I'm going to do a brief introduction of our panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to our moderator. But Sam Hall, who is executive editor of the Clarion Ledger, was one of our panelists this morning. Sam has been at the Clarion Ledger now for a number of years, but he's got over 20 years of journalism experience, really has been focusing on really taking the Clarion Ledger, figuring out, all of the things that take place from a digital standpoint of getting the news out there. He's really came in just as the managing editor, moved his way up to the executive editor in the last few years, and has really done a good job of keeping a pulse on what's happening throughout Mississippi. Sitting next to him is Alan Lange. Alan is the actually founder of Y'all Politics. It was actually designed to be a political outlet since he started in 2004 with the idea of just keeping a pulse on what's happening throughout the state. But he's also an entrepreneur. He has Kinetic Staffing as one of his other businesses. He really just does a lot of different things in the community, and we're happy that Alan is with us as well. And then next to him, or coming on down the line, is Marshall RAMSEY. I don't even know if I need to look at the bio here, but I will just to say, I had the opportunity of working with Marshall for a number of years when I was at the Clarion Ledger, and he's so talented when it comes to the pen. But he's also talented when it comes to being able to decipher what's happening in politics across the state. He just has that certain wit about him that can capture any moment. But he's also an accomplished author. He has 2 books, Chainsaws and Casseroles, which he says basically exemplifies what Mississippi's all about. Does radio, television, so just multi-talented. He is now the editor-at-large at Mississippi Today, the nonprofit news website that's here in Mississippi. And then our moderator this morning is going to be Byron Brown. Byron, a friend of mine, has been a journalist for over 30 years. He's been the anchor at WJTV on the 5, the 6, the 9, and 10. So if you've probably seen Byron a time or two if you're flipping through the channels. He came to Jackson 16 years ago and really has made a mark at the station, and has really been here and through the years covered a lot of things in places in Florida and other places. So we're very happy that we have Byron here to moderate this panel. You gonna keep them straight? But at this rate, again, thank y'all for being with us, and at this point, I will turn it over to Byron. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to you, and thank you for being here this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about some politics and how we cover the politics. A lot going on this election cycle, and it's become a very interesting cycle. I think we were having that discussion as we got started this morning, that it started out like it might be a typical election year here in Mississippi, but things have gotten very interesting lately, particularly in the governor's race and then in the attorney general's race, if you're paying attention to politics. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. A lot of talk is about how we cover things, and we always hear this thing about fake news, right, that we hear on the national level. But when we talk about that, how do you navigate that, and when we hear the subject of fake news, and how do you navigate that issue to your readers and to your listeners? And let's talk with you, Sam.
I don't know. Oh, there we go. All right. So I think on one sense, fake news has become, kind of a crutch phrase for anything that someone disagrees with. Is, okay, that's automatically fake news. But I think on the other hand, there's the internet itself, especially with social media sharing and real-time feedback, kind of changed journalism, because we were seeing a lot of, just instantaneous points being made of, well, what about this angle? What about that angle? And so, there's some legitimate criticisms. There's always legitimate criticisms of any story from any outlet, because A, it's impossible to cover every angle with every story. And so I think that has always been a positive for journalism in general, because it keeps us on our toes, but it also helps us develop new ideas, new angles, and continue reporting on things that we may have otherwise not thought of because we're thinking of it from different angles or whatever. But when you combine that with fake news, now it's anytime you didn't do one certain angle, it becomes fake news. So, as far as how it's changed us, I mean, it makes us continue to be, just as careful and just as thorough as we've always been. But it also, makes us, or forces us to be more responsive, to be more engaging with our readers, with leaders, to help further explain what we're doing, and to push back, because that's part of it. Journalism, especially when covering politics, we've always been treated as kind of a pseudo candidate. They like to attack. They like to blame us for things just to deflect, just like they do other candidates. And used to it was you just kind of take that and you move on, because that's the role of journalists. But today that's evolved even more, that we do have to push back. We do have to defend ourselves. We do have to step out. So I think it's still used largely as a crutch, but as far as what it's made us do, just to be more diligent in what we're doing, and that's not a bad thing.
What about you, Alan?
Yeah, I think, getting into the definition, I think Sam hit it, that fake news is not something that you just don't agree with, right? But I do think in the 15 years that I've been doing this, and obviously there are a lot of people on the stage here that have had a lot of experience. I mean, there are people, professional media people, and I would probably define fake news as either just purely pushing unfactual information, or maliciously pushing kind of quasi-factual information. And I guess you can debate the term however you want to, but it is out there. I'm right. And so the great thing is 10, 12 years ago, when we're doing a political campaign, we're covering a political campaign, the media narrative was driven by what was at the top of the 10 o'clock news and what was on the front page of the newspaper. Well, it's not like that anymore, right? And so, to combat fake news, I mean, I don't know, how everybody else does it, but, we were really founded to democratize first source information, right? And we've always come at it from the perspective of, I don't want to just tell somebody, what I think happened, or what, what this bill means, or what happened in this court case. Here's the bill. Here's the order in the court case. Here's a video of somebody talking about it. And, especially I think that there is a strata at the middle to higher end of the media market where people want to do a little digging, and democratizing first source information, I think, is absolutely the way to combat, fake news.
Last night about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was working on a graduate school paper, because that's how I roll. And I was reading an article by Clay Shirky, and he's a journalist, and he's a professor, and he writes about journalism. And he had a very good point, this era of fake news. Really, right now, if you think about it, with the internet, there probably is no time in the whole history of journalism that we can be held accountable more than we can right now. Because anything you do, you can be called out on it within 35 seconds. And also with social media, and I know we're going to talk about that too, you carry that relationship. But I think it all comes down to trust. And I think with the fracturing of the media market and what's going on, I think us as news consumers, and that includes me too, because obviously I consume a lot of news so I can do my cartoons, in my opinion. I think it's very important for us to be very savvy and to know of news sources that we can trust. And because the whole thing about fake news, yes, it is something that politicians use, but really at the end of the day, we tend to believe things that we see on our friends' Facebook pages more than sometimes what we read randomly. So if a news story pops up and it looks legitimate and it's talking about how, Bill Clinton's from Mars or something like that, sometimes people tend to believe that because it looks real. And so as consumers, we have to be really on top of our game to know what we can trust and what we can't.
Let's talk about the election and getting right into it. We talk at the top of the race, the governor's race. You have the lieutenant governor's, in the governor's race, Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, and now you have Justice Waller, who's now in this race, and Robert Foster. Both Reeves and Waller were in Hattiesburg yesterday talking education. How does this impact the primary here in the Republican side? Let's start with you, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
I think the Republican race is going to be interesting. Obviously, having a $7 million bank account like Tate Reeves has right now makes him a pretty formidable candidate. My own analysis is that Tate Reeves is probably running against not Tate Reeves, and there just happen to be two not Tate Reeves right this minute. But I think, we'll ferret out, how serious the other two candidates are, and I think we'll know here in about a month when campaign finance comes out. Have they been, legitimized in the business community? Do they have enough funding to run a real race? I think the Democratic primary is really interesting, kind of in the context of the last two Democratic primaries for governor. In 2011, Johnny Dupree beat Bill Luckett. Luckett was better funded. He had, I think, probably a better campaign apparatus. And of course, in 2015, a guy who drives a sweet potato truck who didn't vote for himself and whose mama didn't know he was running beat the establishment candidate who had all the money in the world and all the, strange things can happen in Democratic Party politics. And, Jim Hood is running, for the first time where issues I think are really going to matter. He has not had to take a lot of positions, and he's got 9 primary opponents. I'd say 2 or 3 of them are actually very real, and I think it's gonna play out. I would say, just given the history of it, I say Jim Hood's toe is tougher right now in a primary than Tate Reeves.
Marshall?
On a scale of 1 to 10, the cartoon index, I would say this year is at least a 9.5. This is going to be one of the better years in the 22 years that I've been here, because so many races and so many positions are churning and turning over. But, you look at Tate Reeves. Tate Reeves, everybody, obviously money. It should be a coronation. And it surprises me that Waller jumped in there. And there may be a reason why Waller jumped in there. And it'll be kind of interesting because nobody really knows what he stands for because he was a justice the whole time. But the question is, will Tate be able to overcome some of the negatives that he has? I mean, the elephant in the room not being Republican per se, but Tate has made some people angry. Will that affect him and so forth? I know personally it's going to make for great cartoons. And like I said, that's generally what runs my world. But Foster, by the way, did anybody in this room steal Robert Foster's laptop? I was just checking. We're looking. We've kind of been on a hunt for it today. But no, I think it's going to be a fascinating race. It's going to be fun. Talking about Jim Hood, it's whether or not I'd be interested to see how much energy he has. To be honest with you, if it's really in his heart to run, because I know Jim's solid. Jim's obviously he has great name recognition. He's a very, very strong candidate in that sense. How much does he want it? And but you're right, 9 candidates running against him. That could fracture the vote, and who knows what could happen. Especially on the cartoon front, Robert Schuler Smith running too. That's going to be gold.
That's good.
Sam?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were just excited because for the first time in, maybe since, the Fordyce Musgrove, Barbara Musgrove race, we were going to have a general election for governor where you had 2 statewide high name ID candidates. Because we've gotten to a point to where usually, and the Attorney General's race being the exception until this year, the primary was the major deciding factor. So that was exciting in and of itself. You also have 2 candidates there who I think if you were drafting your perfect candidate, neither one of them would be picked. Just for different reasons, which also makes it a little bit interesting because they are slightly imperfect candidates there. But I think having primaries is always good. I think, for one thing, it forces them to spend a little money and talk about themselves early on, and so that makes them have to work harder. But they have to get out more. They can't just sit back and coast until the end of summer. And then ratchet it up a little bit, and then just have basically what is a 2 to 3 week, hard blitz. And that's always good for voters because it's going to expose them to some issues much earlier on. And having 2 primaries, having primary races in both parties is also good because, we're accustomed to it in Republican politics now, especially. And, you know, we can see the shades just like we used to when it was majority Democrat. You know, that was the ball game right there. So you saw the factions and you saw the, you know, the differences of issues there, but they were shades of one another. And same thing goes for Republican politics today. So making them stake out claims early on in a primary and then have to carry those over into a general, I think it's good. I think it benefits the voters. I think it benefits the discussion. And, you know, if we do our jobs correctly, then it leads to a, you know, much more informed public.
Let's talk a little bit about social media. Voters are using it. It's affecting elections. You guys are on it. How do you use it? How do you stay relevant? I know, Marshall, you have a big social media following. So how important is it and how do you stay relevant with it?
Back 22 years ago, I could put a cartoon in the newspaper to go out to 120,000 people. It was like a rifle shot. Now the world is a shotgun. You know, social media is wonderful for many different reasons. Number one, you know, you can get your content out, you can build an audience, and you can build a brand. But also what's really important too is it allows you to have a two-way conversation with your readers. For me, I don't use it necessarily. I don't just spend all day getting in Twitter fights with people. That's not necessarily my MO, but I like to get content out there to people so that they know that it's out there. But also helps, like I said, to build that brand and be able to get stuff to people.
And Aldo, how about you with social media?
Yeah, I mean, you know, certainly it is a huge part of our delivery vehicle for content, right? I mean, we've always been online as our primary mode of delivery, so it is an amplification of what we do. It is a force multiplier. And look, for all the goofiness and fake news and conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff, you know, it has made us, I think, more accountable to people, because 1,000 teachers can get together and have a social media blitz and change the narrative about what's covered and what gets paid attention to, or, you know, road builders, or you name it, right? And so I think it's a great flattener of the kind of the media architecture, where, you know, everything is a lot flatter. And kind of back to my earlier point, you know, there are a whole lot more people out there right now that determine what you see. And, you know, from a consumer perspective, you know, people can self-select what they're interested in, what platform they're interested. You know, there's a difference between a tweet and a Facebook post and all sort, you know, versus an Instagram deal. And people can really self-select how they want to see news. And that comes with good and bad. But I think in very general terms, I think the good really does outweigh the bad.
I think it depends on, you know, what day it is with social media, because a lot of times I think it's the devil's playground, and that's what it feels like. But no, overall, you know, there's a lot of noise, but there's always been a lot of noise in whatever medium is out there. You know, we were talking about fake news earlier, and there's a lot of noise on cable news networks. They used to be that cable news networks were, you could differentiate between what was news and what was opinion commentary. And opinion commentary gets better ratings, and not just in prime time. And so now it's much, much harder to differentiate between those. And so a lot of what you hear and a lot of what you get there that people take as news is really commentary, is really opinion, and there's a lot of noise there. And there's nothing different about social media. There's a lot of great conversations that go on. We get a ton of news tips from there. We get a ton of ideas. The feedback that you get through social media can be invaluable, but there's also a lot of noise. There's a lot of junk. And social media is so much bigger than any medium we've ever had to deal with in the past that it's ever changing, it's evolving. And just as soon as you think you've got one algorithm figured out, they change it. Just when you think you know the groups that you should be really engaged with, other ones pop up. And it can happen overnight, it can happen instantaneous. And you've seen elected officials be able to use this as great messaging tools. I mean, you know, one of the most frustrating things that we've run into from time to time is when we've got elected officials who will just use Facebook as the way that they send out their press releases, and they forget to send them out. So, they get the coverage there, and we see it there, and, we'll contact them and say, hey, can we get some comments? And they're like, oh, yeah, we forgot to send that out. It's makes it something, else where you have to watch, you have to keep up with from our perspective. But the flip side to that is it's such an effective messaging tool. And it's a new means of grassroots for candidates. And you've seen candidates really be able, whether on a local race, all the way up into presidential races, where they've really been able to turn the tide, to make a name for themselves, just from what they've been able to do on social media. I don't think you can win a statewide or a large race with your social media presence alone, but it can be the catalyst that not only raises a candidate's image and profile and leads to fundraising and media attention, and can thrust them into it. And I mean, you can look at President Trump's campaign. He was extremely effective at using mass media, and the grassroots that came from social media was phenomenal. We saw it in 2014 with the U.S. Senate race, Chris McDaniel's people on social media. I mean, that was a huge driver for his campaign.
The political divide seems to be getting wider between the parties. How do you report that, and how do you stay fair and balanced in your reporting when there's such a divide between the parties now? Let's start with you, Alan.
I don't, to be honest with you. I mean, I really don't. The media divide, or the divide in our politics, I don't think was caused by the media. I think it's a reflection of what is actually happening. I don't think, I personally don't ascribe that much power to the media. So I think we report on that. I think we are reflective on that. And I think, again, back to the earlier point about social media, people can self-select what they care about, what their narrative is, and there aren't, a dozen people, sitting in the back rooms of media organizations, this media market, that say, this is the news today. This is what we're covering. That's not the case anymore. There are a lot more voices out there. There are a lot more, but again, I think that our politics are divided, but I don't think the media caused that. I don't think that, and I don't have any personal sense of responsibility from our media organization's perspective to try to ameliorate that. I don't want to necessarily inflame it, but I don't wake up in the morning saying, gosh, how can I bridge the divide in our politics. I don't think that's our media outlet's job.
Sam?
From a coverage standpoint, I mean, it's the same as covering any other issue. You tell both sides of a story, and you've done your job. And past that, there's nothing else to do, just from a strict coverage of two people on two different sides of an issue. Where the real benefit comes is trying to explore and explain what causes that divide and why people on different sides of an issue have those opinions. And you get into telling stories about certain segments of society to better explain why they hold the beliefs that they hold. Because in any debate, the more you understand the other side, where they're coming from, their motives, the better the debate's going to be. From a purely tactical standpoint, the stronger you'll be able to debate an issue as well. And so, we do a lot more of that. And if anything, going back to social media, not media itself, but social media specifically, what that's done is given certain people voices who never would have had them. And a lot of times that's good. You want everybody to have an equal voice. But the flip side to that, and this is where it gets extremely tricky, is sometimes these voices may become larger than, you know, what is reflected of the population. You see it all the time where you see an issue in a certain side of an issue, you know, really grow, and it's going to flame up, and it usually flames out just as quickly. So you still have to be responsible from a media standpoint in reporting on any side of issue, any movement, anything that pops up like that, and that's where, you know, really exploring the people behind these issues becomes so important.
Marshall?
One of the things that's excited me most in the last 4 months that I've been in Mississippi Today is that, number one, we have an a good-sized newsroom full of incredibly talented people, but we also are able to take the time to do a deep dive on issues, because it's so easy, and you know, because now staffs are getting smaller, and I'm about to say, I worked for the Clarion Ledger for years, and I'm very, very good friends with Sam and with the team over there, and I think they do a great job, and I think the Sun Herald does a good job, and I think Tupelo does a good job. But I think what our role is, and one of the nice things that I enjoy working there and seeing the work that's done, is that, yes, it's easy to report on the horse race. Yes, it's easy to give both sides of the story. But if you do a deeper dive when you do a story, you take a little bit more time, you're able to take on some issues that maybe won't get the clicks, you can find out maybe the deeper truth, and you can find out, okay, what's causing this? And Sam touched on that a little bit too. And that's been one of the things that's really been exciting. We did a great teacher series, shortage series, I guess it was in February now. And it really, it woke a lot of people up, because they might have known that teachers had to work 2 jobs, but it really painted it in a picture that I think people could understand. And really, you know, going back to Clay Shirky, who I was reading last night, y'all are going to have to Google this guy. He was really on top of things. But Clay really had a good point that media is going to have to get past, you know, just reporting on that horse race and being able to find out. Because the thing is, because like what Alan was talking about and what Sam was talking about, because so many people now have a platform and a voice, it's our job as the media to be able to go out there and find out whose voice is authentic and whose voice is real. Because you talk about fake news, and there's a lot of people that now have a platform that obviously have an agenda, and I think the media needs to go and be able to find out the truth in those agendas.